We're live streaming, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. Hey, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the meeting of the Maryland State Board of Education Education Policy Committee. Today we have our pre-K to 12 mathematics policy uh, and 3 different COMAR items and the revised social studies standards on our agenda for today. So we have a lot to do, so we'll go ahead and get started on our agenda. So we're going to start today with the pre-K to 12 mathematics policy. So I'll be calling up Lindsay Brightful, Elise Brown, and the MSDE math team to present and to walk us through the policy and where the changes have been made and requested at this time. Ms. Brightful, are you starting us off?
Yes, I am here. I'm going to go ahead and present. And hopefully, okay, you should be able to see my screen. Great. All right. Is this showing? Oh, no. Okay. So happy early evening. We are glad to be back with you all today with the version 2 of our math policy. I'm here with Dr. Elise Brown, our Assistant State Superintendent for Instructional Programs and Services, MSDE's math team, and MSDE's leadership team. Thank you for the feedback you provided earlier in the week. Throughout the presentation, I will reference some updated revisions related to the feedback received on version 2 so far. So I'm going to give a brief high-level overview of the feedback from all stakeholders and align revisions made to version 2. And then we'll review some next steps, and I'll end my presentation to receive any final feedback or questions. So as you know, we immediately begin receiving feedback on version 1 via email and phone call after the January 28th board meeting. This included detailed letters and questions from MCGATE, MDEC, AIB, PZAM, educators, and community members. We also received about 90 responses through the online feedback form, with 50% of those being from school-based educators. We also hosted 2 feedback sessions for LEA leaders, and each session was attended by about 30 attendees, including math supervisors, chief academic officers, assistant superintendents, blueprint coordinators, and PZAM representatives. 20 LEAs were represented between the 2 meetings, and we were able to answer all of their pre-submitted questions and have time for additional questions and discussions in both sessions. And finally, we appreciated the feedback shared at the public hearing at the end of the February board meeting. We are very grateful for all of the detailed feedback and questions from stakeholders, and we intend to keep the communication channels open. MSDE's mathematics branch is actively responding personally to all feedback via written response, phone calls, and virtual meetings. We are currently finalizing our response to PZAM and AIB and reaching out to follow up with each stakeholder who shared testimony at the public hearing on February 25th. MSDE's data and research team supported us to align almost all of the feedback to the 3 overall trends of equity, access, and student learning experience, learning structures and feasibility, and timeline and implementation. So these are the areas that led to the most significant revisions in version 2 of the math policy. Additionally, as our team reviewed the policy, we had a critical lens of ensuring revisions reflected positive language of what we wanted to be true related to math instruction across the state. You'll find rewording of any statements that we said what should not happen to what should happen. And we removed some areas that were driven by other initiatives and not math instruction. In terms of equity, access, and student learning experience, some revisions included explicit strategies for historically underserved student groups, including students with disabilities and multilingual learners. These are now outlined in Policy Standard A4 on page 12. We also recognize from recent feedback that we need to update the references for this additional information. In the definitions section, we refined definitions for clarity and removed terms that may have been causing more confusion than clarity, such as differentiating up. These terms will be further explained with models and guidance documents. We also added a clear definition for acceleration and secondary math pathways. This was a shift in language from advanced math pathways so that the pathways after integrated algebra 1 and 2 would not be confused with advanced or gifted and talented math courses available throughout the entire course progression. We also revised acceleration language to provide clarity around the expectation of acceleration course progression for all students beginning in 3rd grade at the latest. In Policy Standard A, you'll find acceleration move to its own section in numbers 6 and 7 on page 13, separated from equitable separated from the equitable scheduling expectation. We do understand that acceleration progressions has implications for scheduling, and to have these closer together might be better, but we did want to separate them and not have them confuse or overlay each other. And lastly, for this, I want to share that the practice of automatic enrollment and acceleration for students who demonstrate readiness based on their state assessment progress remains in the policy without the barrier of a review committee, but we'll ensure that this is a clear expectation and outline grade by grade expectations based on student outcomes on the state assessment. We also want to ensure that automatic enrollment is one pathway towards acceleration, but not the only pathway. In terms of learning structures and feasibility, access and equitable mathematics opportunities remains Policy Standard A, as we believe it is the foundation for improving math instruction and student outcomes. On page 11, the multi-tier systems of support for mathematics has been moved to become the first component of Standard A, access and equitable mathematics opportunities, to ensure that this is the driver for ensuring equitable and responsive math instruction. Following this, on page 12, Standard A, number 3, we clarified expectations for scheduling, support, and flexible grouping in elementary math classrooms. We have received additional feedback for revisiting the language for elementary grades 2 to 5 again, and plan to do so with the lens of ensuring the focus is on math classrooms, but also ensuring that the opportunity for acceleration in these grade levels is available. We will also be responsive to the feedback to ensure family engagement and support is incorporated into Policy Standard A. We've added Appendix A and B to communicate more information and rationale for implementation of integrated algebra courses. More detail was added to the timeline to share when full course standards and resources are expected to be available. We are actively working with our Standards Revision Committee and Launch Year's Task Force, consisting of math educators from LEAs, community colleges, and university leaders to meet this timeline. Earlier this week, we engaged in a full-day joint meeting, and we will continue this work throughout the spring. We understand that the policy also needs some additional information about each secondary math pathway, and we'll update this accordingly. I do also want to clarify that integrated algebra 1 and 2 will be algebra 1 and algebra 2 high school math credits. There have been some inquiries about the recognition of these courses in higher education and the NCAA. We are in consistent communication with University of Maryland System about the upcoming shifts, so they are aware and they are open to collaboration to support implementation. We have reviewed high school math requirements for top universities across the nation, including HBCUs, Ivy Leagues, and neighboring state universities. There are no contradictions to the implementation of integrated Algebra 1 and 2 as high school math credits. And lastly, MSDE's mathematics branch met with NCAA last week to confirm that they do recognize courses with integrated in the title. Several states across the country implement integrated math courses, and NCAA agreed to review the course standards and resources when finalized and proactively reach out to Maryland districts and schools to help them update their course list in alignment with the progression shift. In terms of timeline and implementation, we do want to reiterate that our Office of Teaching and Learning has implemented several new systems to ensure that we are consistently connecting across all contents to streamline support and expectations for all educators. This will not be able to be implemented without a robust plan for educator professional learning at every level. We have received feedback about adding coaches to this policy, and we truly understand the value of instructional coaches and do want to expand instructional coaching for math across the state, but we do need to do so in a way that is intentional and sustainable. At this time, we do not have the financial resources to support mandates for LEA coaches, so we'll need to leverage current structures we'll need to leverage current structures to provide support for implementation. As you know, Maryland State Department of Education is actively pursuing expansion of coaching and other professional learning opportunities to support policy implementation. Lastly, we also revised the timeline to align revised standard implementation with assessment and scheduling expectations. So this has been pushed back a year to provide an additional year for planning and before implementation. We know that the math policy has a lot of changes, and change can be challenging. We are grateful for the strong relationships that our math team and leadership has built with LEA leadership, and we'll continue to leverage this strong partnerships through all phases of implementation. We understand the need for guidance and resources as soon as possible and assure that the reference guidance, such as the Numeracy Development Framework, the MTSS Math Guidance, Integrated Algebra Standards and Course Scopes, Math Standard Family Guides, and Responsible Acceleration Guides will all be available by fall 2025 to support planning and implementations of shifts beginning in school year 2026-27. We do need to release the guidance after the adoption of the policy to ensure full alignment. We also are recognizing that some department resources and support is not consistently reaching school-based leaders and classroom educators. And we are working on some strategies to ensure that all of these resources do reach the school level to support their practices and ensure that we can close the communication and support gap. So we are open and expect any additional feedback to version 2 of the math policy throughout this week. And it is now available on our website, and we've already started to get some feedback. We will continue to respond and engage with all stakeholders. We look forward to continuous robust discussions related to Maryland's math policy and the national movement around mathematics. We are excited to host 2 screenings tomorrow of the film Count It Out. These will be co-hosted by University of Maryland's College Park and Loyola University's Math Education Department and the Maryland Council of Teachers for Mathematics. The afternoon session is free to all stakeholders, and if anyone doesn't have information is interested, please reach out to me. We're also excited to do a deep dive of a math policy implementation time machine with our math supervisors at our collaborative next week to collaboratively engage in some long and short-term system planning. We are hopeful for adoption of the math policy at the March board meeting. And I will now stop sharing to open up for any feedback or questions to help us towards the next steps of this work.
Thank you, Ms. Brightful. I appreciate the presentation. The way that I'd like to organize our questions and stuff is as we go through the policy, I'm going to go to each different portion of the policy, and that way we can kind of keep our questions in one space in the document. And if you have a question that you have related to that particular area, that you can bring that up as we go through. In general, I have one quick process question, Ms. Brightful, if you don't mind. So what we have in front of us today is policy number 2. This is our second version of the policy. So you're still taking feedback and still integrating everything that the state board has given you. When do you anticipate having like a final version in the hands of the state board members? I guess we'd call it version 3 once you integrate everything.
Yes, and I was going to call it version like 2.5 because I think it's a little it's very similar, but some tweaks that we've already started to make. We anticipate to have it to you by tomorrow.
Okay, excellent. And you anticipate that everything you went over today that you talked about today will be included in that as we look forward to, whether or not we make a recommendation as a committee today. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And before we move into the document, if we have anyone that has a question or comment that is not related to a specific section, Mr. Crawford, is yours more of a general?
Yes,
Okay, please do.
I applaud what the department is doing. This is incredibly important. The thing that I think we've got to look at maybe in the next budget cycle is resources to support this and to fully roll this out. Chair Leggett had said that his experience as county exec was the one measure that people really cared about as a county exec was, did you get the snow removed from in front of my house within hours of the snow falling? And he said that measures like reading levels and math levels are akin to that. When people think about whether we have been successful, they're going to look at math, they're going to look at reading. So putting the necessary resources behind, I know you are, so I'm not being critical. I'm just re-emphasizing the need to make sure that we resource these things properly, because this is what what matters. The last thing I'll just mention, if you go back to our strategic plan, one of the common comments or high scoring measures, what people saw education, a powerful education system, as one of the best things to do to improve the economic status of the government of Maryland. So again, there's a correlation there. Maybe we can use some of that data to sort of help underscore why it's so important to make the investments here. Nicely done, team. Thank you, Chair McCusker.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Dr. Michael, excuse me. You're muted.
Thank you. Just following up to emphasize Mr. Crawford's point, Dr. Wright made a really compelling case on the need to resource this work. And the governor has included in his budget 5 pins that will support the math office. And it's yet to be determined whether that will be included in the House's version of the budget. Hopefully it will, as well as then it'll pass to the Senate. So we received an update on that earlier this week, and just wanted to lift that, just how critical those pins are in the governor's budget for next year.
Thank you. All right. If we don't have any more general questions, oh, Ms. Lewis.
I do. I wanted to thank can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I wanted to thank the team for clearly integrating comments that both board members made and public comment that had been received, particularly the addition of flexible grouping, universal design for learning, and sort of booting the acceleration portion so it's more clearly understandable, and making sure that IEPs are mentioned and how they're integrated into the math work. So I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Anyone else with general comments? If not, I'm going to go into the document and we'll go through each section and people can chime in as they need to. So we'll start with section 1, purpose. Are there any questions or comments about the purpose section of the document? No? Okay, seeing none, I will move on to the definitions. Section 2, any questions or comments concerning definitions? Excellent, all right. And section 3 is advancing numeracy through consistent, clear, and effective mathematics instruction. Do we have anything specific we need to bring forward? Okay. Moving along. Section 4 in the policy standards. Okay, I do have one quick thing I would like to bring forward in this particular section, and I sent it to you, Ms. Brightful, but my concern was with A, 3, C, and E, where we talk about something called a support course and the flexibility to move students in and out of support courses. And I as an elementary educator, I get how that would work with elementary scheduling. As a parent, having watched my kids go through the middle school and high school scheduling, that to me didn't quite, I make sense on how you would do that. And because once if their fourth mod is when they have math, and then if they need to move in a support course and the support course is a different mod, does that kick them out of another class? So I was wondering if you'd had any conversation with people in schools or the LEA math coordinators on how they might deal with that sort of flexible scheduling in the more fixed schedule environments of middle and high school. Have you been kind of brainstorming that? Because I wasn't sure how that would work.
Yes, thank you for your question. We do have middle school support courses that run in several LEAs throughout the state already. The flexibility in moving students in and out is a practice that we are seeing increase, but still definitely need to do some more brainstorming and streamlining around what the most common practice is for it to be run. It's not in place of math, it's additional course, and it'll be run at the same time as electives. So students have the opportunity to change in and out at quarterly at the least. And so they can change into another course. If they no longer need the support, they would change into an elective. And if they now are identified as needing support, then they could change into the math support course. We did visit several of our schools that had demonstrated progression on the MCAP. And so we were able to identify some exemplar models of this throughout the state, and we would leverage them to help others build a model. This is something that, again, we did push back the expectation of implementation. It was 25-26, so next year, and we did push it back to 26-27 so we can have more of an opportunity to support effective implementation and learn best practice. I want to say it is a challenge, right? It is different. It is not a common practice right now, but we do want to embrace it and really pull from best practices to support students, knowing that sometimes a student may need additional support in a concept like fractions, but they don't need it when we get to the data unit, just as an example, and we want to be responsive as possible. So it's something that we want to have in here to explore and know that it is the best practice for supporting students, but it will take some time for full implementation.
Thank you. And my other question concerning that was, how are we with teacher recruitment in math? If we're going to have extra support classes, we're going to need more math educators. Are we doing well on the state level with our math recruiting at the moment?
I don't have exact numbers. It's gotten better, but it's not
Okay.
where we would like it to be. So it is steady. It's a steady effort that we want to focus on all teachers and especially math. I think something else we have started to explore here is around how can we flex math teacher scheduling such that they are available then? So that's something else we saw in some of those exemplar models, the way that they had certain support staff covering maybe a different class so that math teachers could support in these areas. So again, we'll be pulling from those exemplar models who are already doing it best and seeing how we can replicate it in other areas across the state.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time and the answer. Any other questions for this section? Dr.
Yes,
Lewis?
please. Yes, thank you. I noticed in the first version, high quality instructional materials were noted, and in your PowerPoint, you had a bullet for high quality instructional materials, but has that been integrated into the policy? Because on my read, I really didn't see a portion, and I know we received feedback on that as well.
Yes, I will give a brief answer and then I'll also yield to Dr. Brown if she wants to add anything. This was one of the areas, so we had mentioned that implementation of high quality instructional materials supports math instruction.
Mhm.
And then when we revisited, we said, okay, we have a lot of initiatives related to high quality instructional materials that are overarching. And let's focus here on what does it actually look like to support math instruction at a high level and outline that rather than people can have high quality instructional materials and they're not doing these items. So we took that out so that we can let the HQIM initiative drive that and we drive the math portion. But I'll see if Dr. Brown wants to add anything related.
I would just add that I know you haven't received a HQIM update in a while. So where we are right now is recruiting reviewers. And so we're pulling data from ed reports, but we are working on our math, our social studies, and our science rubrics currently. Those are set to be ready in May. And then we'll start reviewing our first round of materials for a pilot year starting in June. And so we're not confident we'll have a comprehensive list of HQIM to rely on at that time, but we are hopeful. We do have ed reports. So we were just trying to balance the language and making sure we're meeting expectations where they are for both initiatives coming in together.
Will there be any notation in the policy about high quality instructional
Yes.
materials?
There should be. I was gonna,
Okay.
that's
We
what I was
can.
gonna weigh in, absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay,
Even if we've got not got it nailed down, the people should know the direction that we're heading. And I also want to say that beyond ed reports, there are other resources that we are going to be looking at that also look over high quality instructional materials. So we want to make sure that we're looking at a broad spectrum of those folks that have already kind of done some of that work and will help facilitate some of our work. But yes, Dr. Lewis, we will definitely have a notation about HQIM for sure.
thank you. And thank you for your diligence, everyone.
Okay, any other questions, comments, points to bring up in our policy standards section? Dr. Michael?
Yeah, just real quick. One, just provided at several things, at several points by feedback, and just really pleased to see those reflected in the summary today. So thank you for your responsiveness. This is probably a matter that belongs in guidance, but I want to raise it in this space. We, within the decades, we swing back and forth out of 4x4s. And we, particularly in our secondary schools, and we are in a swing with 4x4s, which has a lot of benefits. One of the challenges is that students sometimes receive math for only half of the year and then don't have math for the other half of the year. And I'm very concerned, particularly for students that are struggling with math, struggling in math in middle grades and early in our course 1 and course 2 sequences, to go extended periods of time plus the summer without mathematics instruction, having opportunities to practice, particularly as we're leaning back into numeracy and specifically procedural development or procedural fluency development, where practice is so important. So I wanted to just see how you all are thinking about that, what guidance might look like, I know we started talking about the companion course. I know there's some solutions out there, but how you're thinking about that issue in conversation with districts and how that might live in guidance that comes out in the future.
Yes, definitely something we're thinking about. We didn't receive this explicit feedback, but realized as a team that we need to address block scheduling in our minimum instructional minute component. In the guidance for integrated algebra 1 and 2, we will and within the scope, we will recommend that they are not implemented in semester blocks. And then we will work with LEAs that do have semester blocks to think about what it could look like for these courses. But it's definitely, we're definitely thinking about it. It's on our radar. We know there will be support needed. And we'll continue to work with LEAs when we get to the implementation of the courses.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Goldson.
Thank you. I had a few questions. The first one is around access and equitable mathematics opportunities. Just under tier 1, it notes that the classroom teacher has to be a licensed mathematics teacher. So just want to make a note of, we know what if MSDE has some provisions on what happens if the teacher is considered provisional or conditional. Tier 2 and tier 3 under that same section, will those interventions and supports be only offered during the day or after school or after school? And then under that same section, number 2, just want to make sure that we have a plan in place on how we plan to monitor the review of scheduling policies and practices. That's all I have for standard. Oh, no, one more. And number 5, when it says that there'll be 60 minutes and there'll be 60 instructional minutes for mathematics for math courses in grades K through grade 8. Are those 60 continuous minutes? Are those 60 cumulative in a day? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions or comments in section 4? Okay, moving on then. It's a long one. Section 5 is the timeline. So I noticed very responsive to all the comments that a little bit more time is going to be needed. So thank you very much for adjusting the timeline, giving LEAs time to really do a solid job of implementation. Anything else?
Yep.
Oh, Dr. Wilson?
Yep, thank you. I just noted that in the timeline, I think summer of 2025 has been omitted by mistake. So, because there are some actions for summer 2025. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on the timeline? Okay. Section 7, our responsibilities. Do we have any questions about our LEA, State Department, State Board responsibilities? Okay. References is last. I don't know that we would have any questions about this, but it's there. Okay. Any questions about the appendices that have been added? Appendix A is our integrated algebra pathway. And then Appendix B is the prerequisite math concepts for advanced math. Okay. All righty. Then we have kind of made our way through the policy. At this time, if the committee so wishes, we can put forth a motion to recommend the policy for adoption to the state board, assuming that we will see the final draft with all of the things that have been brought up. And I leave that to the group, to anyone who wishes to make that motion, or we could hold it off. But I believe that it's requested that we consider recommending adoption?
I make a recommendation to accept the policy with the recommended draft change, with the recommended changes or questions answered from today's work session in the
Okay.
next iteration.
Are there any, is there a second?
A second.
Dr. Lewis seconded. Any discussion? Okay, then I'm going to put it forth to the members of the committee. All in favor of recommending adoption of the policy with the assumption that we will see the recommended changes in the final draft, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any noes? Abstentions? Policy passes unanimously. We'll make a unanimous recommendation, assuming that we see all of the changes in the final draft. Thank you, everyone, very much. This process went really smoothly. I appreciate everyone's attention to our request for having information ahead of time for staff, so it's easier for them to address our questions in real time. So thank you very much, and we will bring that forward with a recommendation at our next board meeting, and I look forward to seeing the 2.5 version, Ms. Brightful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good one.
All right, well done. Moving on. We have COMAR 13A.03.08, students at risk for reading difficulties. This is a permission to publish, and I believe Christina Rodriguez is going to be addressing us this afternoon. Ms. Rodriguez?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for your time. My name is Christina Rodriguez. I'm the manager of literacy programs and initiatives. We are coming here today to discuss revisions or a repeal and replace of the original COMAR 13A.0308, students at risk for reading difficulties. The original COMAR was adopted by the state board in 2021, and it was an effort to implement the Ready to Read Act, Maryland Education Code 4-126, which was passed in the 2019 legislative session. So we have taken the original COMAR and have made some pretty heavy revisions. In short, the number of revisions we wanted to include made the track changes version pretty much unreadable, which is why you have the original version and the new version. But we will be walking through both versions so you can understand how the changes were made. So overall, there were a few purposes of repealing and replacing the original COMAR. So the first was to align COMAR to the other policies and regulations adopted by the state board, such as the Resolution 2401 and the Pre-K to 3 Comprehensive Literacy Policy. This will ensure clarity and remove any portions that provide conflicting guidance that exist in the in-use regulations currently. It's also to strengthen accountability and ensure that there is alignment with current best practices in reading instruction across the state. Overall, the focus of the revised COMAR is to focus on early identification, intervention, and accountability systems for students at risk for reading difficulties. And by doing this, we can ensure that all students receive the structured evidence-based literacy instruction that is necessary to become a proficient reader. So I will go section by section. I know this is something you may be doing afterwards as well, but I'll be going section by section to review the differences between the old version and the new version, and that is how I'm going to refer to them. So the old version will be the 2021 version, and the new version is the proposed 2025 version. So starting in section 0.03, the first is the purpose and the definitions, which have not been changed very much. A few definitions have been added just for clarity purposes, but no general huge differences. So in section 0.03, which focuses on student screening, the major change was to expand coverage to more students. So the original COMAR, in the original COMAR, screening was only required for kindergarten students and for identified students in grades 1 through 3 who had already shown signs of reading difficulties. The original COMAR also did not stipulate the number of times a student should be screened in a school year. It only stated that the student should be screened in accordance with the chosen screener, and that the schedule would be established by the LEA. So as opposed to the new proposed COMAR, That would expand screening to all students in kindergarten through third grade. That ensures early identification and intervention for every student, not just those already exhibiting challenges. It would also require screening 3 times per year, specifically stated as fall, winter, and spring, to track progress and identify new challenges early. It also ensures uniformity by mandating that all screenings take place within the first 60 days of the school year. So that is the first section. Just to clarify that point as well, most of our districts are already screening all of our students 3 times a year, even though it is not mandated in COMAR currently. So it is something that should not be groundbreaking for them. So we don't have any, we don't anticipate it being an issue for our school districts. Moving on to section 0.04, it is focused on screening instruments and delivery. And that was really focusing on standardizing tools and the personnel. So in the original COMAR, that allowed a broad discretion for LEAs in selecting the screening instruments that were used. That led to inconsistencies in how reading difficulties were identified, or really how they were defined across the state. Some school districts may have used high-quality research-based tools, while others may have relied on less effective or outdated assessments. This created equity gaps in early intervention as well. And without state-approved criteria, some school districts may have chosen screeners that don't comprehensively assess those foundational reading skills. The new COMAR mandates MSDE-approved screening instruments that specifically assess all the components, so phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, sound symbol recognition, decoding, fluency, and rapid automatic naming. This also limits the administration of screening to trained school personnel. That was actually not specified in the original COMAR. So it did say that personnel needed to be trained, but it did not specify that those who were delivering the screening needed to be trained. So that included classroom teachers, reading specialists, school psychologists, et cetera, et cetera. In section 0.05, which is screening data and supplemental reading instruction, this is the largest amount of changes in all of the sections. We really wanted to focus on targeted interventions for struggling readers. So in the original COMAR, we required general supplemental reading instruction, but we didn't standardize the intervention processes. And we found that section generally to be a little bit lacking in terms of clarity and accountability. So the new COMAR, the new proposed COMAR, I should say, introduces diagnostic surveys. So that means that once a student is identified as at risk in the MSDE approved screener, a diagnostic survey will determine the specific areas of reading difficulty. We have found that a lot of our districts are not using diagnostic surveys, meaning that their supplemental instruction isn't exactly tailored to the exact need as identified by the diagnostic. So that would also include that supplemental reading instruction must be evidence-based, data-driven, and aligned, again, with that specific area of deficit. This section will also require a student reading improvement plan. The original COMAR did include a student, oh goodness, I'm not going to say this correctly, but it included some sort of supplemental instruction plan, but we are changing it specifically to align with the policy, which identifies a student reading improvement plan. That is for students who are identified as at risk, and it's a personalized plan that must be developed within 30 days for each identified student. Just like the policy, the SRIP must include specific interventions, frequency and intensity of instruction, and regular progress monitoring. Additionally, in this section, we included supplemental reading instruction that occurs during the school day through MTSS, which we'll get to in a moment. It also requires LEAs to provide parents and guardians with written descriptions as to how their child's been identified, and also to invite them to the SRIP, or the Student Reading Improvement Plan process, again, in alignment with the policy. And it also ensures that progress monitoring will determine whether interventions should be adjusted. Within section 0.05 is also a very heavy introduction to multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS. In the original COMAR, MTSS is only mentioned once in the entirety of the regulation, mentioning that the local school system may revise that supplemental instruction based upon progress monitoring and placement in an appropriate MTSS. Did not clarify as to what that necessarily meant. And we have realized since then that MTSS is definitely interpreted in different ways across districts in the state. The new proposed COMAR focuses on an MTSS framework that ensures that all students receive appropriate academic and behavioral support. And I emphasize that all, once again. Students identified at risk will receive tiered interventions, and we did go so far as to define the tiered interventions. Tier 1, meaning core instruction aligned with grade level standards. Tier 2 is supplemental instruction for students not making sufficient progress. And Tier 3 is intensive individualized intervention based on persistent learning needs. We wanted to make sure that those definitions were clear and concise, and will be also utilized as we continue to create guidance for the policy. Finally, within section 0.05, we did also clarify SRIPs for students, or really in general, for students with disabilities. The purpose was to strengthen those considerations for students with IEPs. So in the original COMAR, that exempted students with an IEP that included reading goals from any additional screening. The exclusion could have potentially impacted a student who had an IEP to not have access to the Tier 2 or Tier 3 instruction that would be appropriate for their needs. The new COMAR, the new proposed COMAR, ensures that students with an IEP receive appropriate screenings and intervention in addition to their IEP services. It mandates that IEP teams review the screening results to determine whether a student reading improvement plan is necessary or if the IEP needs a modification to align with that student reading improvement plan. There will be more guidance to support them in that decision-making as well. It also explicitly states that the new regulations will not delay or deny any necessary evaluations under IDEA, meaning that a student with an IEP will have access to the MTSS system, so all tiered instruction, and any student who is in tiered instruction will also have access to the proper screening required under IDEA. Moving on to section 0.06, which is progress monitoring. We actually did not make any changes to this section whatsoever, as it was already aligned to the comprehensive literacy policy adopted. Moving on to the final section, I want to make sure that was the final section. 0.07 is reporting and accountability requirements. And we really wanted to focus on enhancing the accountability and the transparency. So the original COMAR only required general data submission on screen students. It ensured that local school systems needed to submit an annual report to MSDE by July 1 of every school year. And this deadline came sort of at an awkward time for some districts, as we found that it was right after the end of the school year, and our ELA supervisors and ELA teams were unable to utilize that data to its fullest potential for any decision making. We did switch in the proposed revised COMAR for the reporting to be done by September 1. This aligns with the collection required by the pre-K to 3 literacy policy as well, and will hopefully allow for more time for school systems to analyze that data and utilize it to make decisions for the coming school year. Additionally, we added that the LEAs must disaggregate the data by grade level, as it was already, but also by race, disability status, multilingual learner status, and eligibility for free and reduced price meals. In addition, because that is all of the sections, but some additional notes is that the implementation timeline of this new revised COMAR would be that in 2025-2026, meaning this upcoming school year, that would require universal screening for all K to 3 students. As I mentioned, this is something that's already being done, so we don't foresee it being an issue. 2026 and 2027 is when the full implementation of diagnostic surveys, multi-tiered systems of support, the student reading improvement plans, and enhanced reporting would go into effect. Finally, the only thing that is not included, the only major component that is not included or transferred from the pre-K to 3 comprehensive literacy policy was retention. You will not find retention in the revised COMAR. It was not included in this COMAR because it currently lives in a different, I'm going to say this wrong, in a different piece of legislation. So it currently lives in MD Code Education 7-202, which is the minimum levels of reading ability. So it did not fit within what COMAR was originally intended for. So in conclusion, the 2025 revised COMAR marks a significant shift towards standardization, evidence-based, and equity-driven literacy instruction. And really the goal was that the changes will identify students at risk earlier, will ensure more frequent data-driven interventions, it will engage families more effectively in student progress, and will hold schools accountable for literacy outcomes through transparent reporting. So it just shows a commitment to closing Maryland's literacy gap and ensuring that every student has the foundational reading skills necessary for success. And that's all I have for you today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments from members of the committee? Dr. Manley McCarthy?
So thank you for this. I love the comprehensive nature. I love a lot of the wording. I love how you integrated children with IEPs. And I particularly love that retention is not included in this, because if it was, I would have voted against it. So I do appreciate it, and I like the changes. Thank you.
Dr. Johnson?
Okay, I have two questions, specifically in section 0.5. You indicate a recommendation for diagnostic tools. Have those tools been identified, and are we going to make sure that the diagnostic tools that will be incorporated are of high quality?
We are going to be supporting LEAs in choosing diagnostic tools.
Okay.
Diagnostic tools are a little bit more tricky to provide an approved list. So we will not be providing an approved list the way that we will be doing it for screeners. But considering the fact that they will also need to tell us what their diagnostic tool is in their reporting, we will make sure that they are of quality as we continue on.
Okay. And my second question is about, it's again in 0.5 on K, where you indicated that the child with an IEP would could possibly have two plans, could have a reading plan and also an IEP. That's going to be very cumbersome for teachers to implement. Why won't we just not incorporate the needs into the IEP?
That is a great question. I'm so glad you asked. We spent a long time discussing this with our special education folks at MSDE. We realized that the way that goals were written for the IEP and the way that goals were written for the student reading improvement plan are very different. So we didn't want to blanket statement that a student didn't need both, because they may benefit from both, but there is a way we foresee that they can almost be combined. So what we're hoping to do is that once a student is screened, or a student with an IEP is screened, and they determine that more needs to be done, that the IEP can be revised to match what the goals in the SRIP would be. We don't anticipate any student needing two plans. That just seems a little bit redundant. But ensuring that the student reading improvement plan is a tool utilized in the IEP process.
Yeah, and I don't, the wording is kind of indicating to me that there's a possibility that there will be two plans. So how do we indicate that for teachers? Because I can just see teachers going berserk because when they see, oh, I'm going to have two plans, and the difficulty. I don't know if we just kind of need some wordsmithing around that, or.
I'm trying to find the exact language so I can take note of that. Give me one moment.
Dr. Johnson, I think you bring up a really good point. If you give us a chance to kind of offline, look at something and then maybe shoot it back to you guys for a review.
Okay, great.
Dr. Lewis?
Just as an example, you might have a student who has a speech and language disability, who has some goals around articulation, word processing, language processing, etc., but they may not have any reading goals. So I think what I understand this to be is all the diagnostics, all the screening instruments would inform a plan and or an IEP. So it depends on the student's individual needs, what would go into their individual education program.
Absolutely.
But not duplicative.
That's exactly right. That's a great summary of that. And if that's not coming through, then we need to make that
Yeah.
clear. That's a perfect summary.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
that's what we need to do. Yeah, great.
Dr. Melanie McCarthy?
That's how I took it, Dr. Lewis. But thank you for reading it that way, Dr. Johnson, because if you saw it that way, then other people can take it that way. But I saw it the way you saw it, Dr. Lewis.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? Okay. We have been asked to make a recommendation on permission to publish. Permission to publish is that first step where it goes out for public comment and then can come back with revision, depending on what comes back for the public comment period. So I will entertain a motion to recommend approval to permission to publish. Dr. Lewis, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, so moved with the potential of changing, clarifying that language in the IEP piece a little bit.
Okay. Any seconds on that? Oh, seconded by Dr. Johnson. Any questions, comments, discussion? All in favor of a recommendation for permission to publish, please raise your hand and say aye. These are committee members only.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay, we are unanimously recommending permission to publish.
Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you. Next up, we have the revised social studies standards. This is a permission to adopt, and I welcome Peter Ramsey for presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to share my screen here really quick and we'll get going. All right. Good afternoon again, members of the Education Policy Committee. My name is Peter Ramsey, and I serve as the Director of Social Studies in the Office of Teaching and Learning, Instructional Programs and Services. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the Social Studies Standards and Frameworks Validation Committee, also known as the Educate to Stop the Hate Committee, and the proposed revisions to Maryland's Social Studies frameworks. Today, I'm going to provide you with a little bit of an overview of the public comment process. I'm going to highlight some of the key trends in the feedback and share the revisions that were made in response, and also outline next steps as we move towards final adoption. I want to first begin with a quick snapshot of the proposed changes from a purely numbers perspective. The big takeaway here is that the SFEC, the Social Studies SFEC, really tried to utilize a scalpel approach. What that means is that the committee worked hard to be intentional and precise in its proposed revisions. We recognize that the existing social studies frameworks and standards are strong, and it's important that we didn't take away from that strength. The public comment period ran from February 3rd to March 4th. This process provided a valuable opportunity to hear from educators, parents, community members, and stakeholders about the proposed framework revisions. Overall, the feedback reaffirmed the need for a robust and inclusive approach to social studies instruction, one that prepares students for an active civic engagement and deep historical understanding. The overwhelming response showed strong support for the proposed revisions, while also providing constructive feedback that has led to important refinements. The goal of this process was simple: to ensure that the frameworks meet the needs of Maryland students and reflect best practices in social studies instruction. We received 115 total public comments. As you can see in this breakdown, the majority of responses were supportive. 87% of respondents either fully supported or supported with amendments. A smaller percentage opposed the revisions, with most concern centering on specific wording choices rather than overall structure or intent of the frameworks. This data indicates broad consensus that these updates strengthen social studies education in Maryland. When analyzing public comments, three key positive themes emerged. First and foremost, the inclusion of the Holocaust in both 6th and 7th grade received strong approval. Many respondents recognize that national guidelines support this approach and emphasize the importance of ensuring students engage with this history at an appropriate developmental level. There was also positive recognition of the global perspective embedded in the frameworks. Educators and stakeholders valued the emphasis on world history and geography as an essential part of student learning. Many commended the clarity and organization of the revised frameworks with which make instructional implementation more effective. At the same time, two key areas were identified for refinement: clarification around the inclusion of and/or in the 6th grade frameworks. Some respondents expressed concern that the use of and/or could allow for unbalanced coverage of global topics. Also, request for greater clarity on how contemporary events are framed. This specifically pertained to the 6th grade frameworks and how they connect historical events to modern day issues. In response to these trends, we made targeted refinements to ensure clarity and alignment with best practices, such as clarifying language in the frameworks to ensure that all revisions meet the highest academic standards and reflect historical accuracy. Just a quick note on the proposed revisions: national organizations such as the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and Facing History and ourselves recommend introducing the Holocaust education in middle school. By explicitly including Holocaust instruction in 6th grade, the frameworks now align with national recommendations while maintaining a scaffolded approach in 7th grade. These experts cite the developmental ability to empathize with individual eyewitness accounts and the content needed to contextualize events surrounding Holocaust history as limiting factors for introducing the content to younger learners. Instead, these organizations advocate for the inclusion of objectives that have young learners analyze the value of diversity and the dangers of bias and prejudice. The pre-K through 5th grade state frameworks provide opportunities for students to learn concepts such as freedom, bias, power, authority, diversity, and the role of the individual in supporting the common good. The Social Studies SFEC has followed these guidelines. Also, the SFEC was able to meet with the Asian American Pacific Islander Work Group, as this group presented the committee with framework recommendations. If you take a look at the top of page 19 in your proposed changes document, you will see how one of their recommendations was synthesized into the proposed revisions. One specific area where public feedback led to refinements was in the 6th grade framework's treatment of authoritarian regimes. Before the revision, the language could be misinterpreted as linking the Holocaust directly to technological or economic limitations. After the revision, we reconstructed the sentence to make it clear that the Holocaust is included as an example of authoritarian regimes restricting human rights, rather than being linked to economic or technological impacts. This refinement ensures clarity while maintaining the instructional intent. Another common theme in the public comments was the use of and/or in certain grade 6 objectives. Some respondents expressed concerns that this language could allow for selective teaching of regions, potentially leading to gaps in instruction. To address this, we removed almost all of the instances of and/or, while also providing additional guidance on maintaining global coverage within the frameworks. The goal is to balance flexibility for districts while the expectation that instruction remains comprehensive and inquiry-driven. Another refinement based on public comment relates to the framing of contemporary events in grade 6. The revised frameworks ensure students engage with modern history through 1980, providing critical context for understanding today's global issues. While current events are not explicitly outlined in the frameworks, given their rapidly evolving nature, educators still have opportunities to integrate contemporary discussions through inquiry-based learning. This approach ensures historical grounding while allowing flexibility to local curriculum decisions. Looking ahead, the next steps in the process include finalizing the summary report and incorporating these refinements, presenting the revised frameworks to the full Board of Education on March 25th, and ensuring all instructional materials align with the updated frameworks to support strong implementation. We remain committed to strengthening social studies education in Maryland and appreciate the continued engagement of all stakeholders in this process. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for the dedication to ensuring high-quality social studies education for Maryland students. I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramsey. Could you please take your screen down so that I can see if we have any committee members with questions? Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Okay. Anyone with questions or comments concerning the social studies standards? None? Okay. I appreciate that you gave us a pretty thorough rundown. It looks like you included a lot of the changes that were mentioned by the public, particularly the and or. Can you, so that you took most of that out in the sixth grade? Okay. Any other? Okay. So this is up for permission to adopt with the changes that have been shown. Do we have any motions on the table for whether or not we recommend? Dr. Maley McCarthy? Are you moving to recommend adoption? Okay, I wasn't sure if that's what your motion was going to be. Do we have any seconds on that motion?
A second.
Dr. Lewis seconds the motion. Okay, so any discussion? All in favor of a recommendation to adopt, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we are unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. We appreciate it. Moving on, we have COMAR 13A.12.01.04, issuance and types of licenses. 13A.12.04.02, license for specialists. 13A.12.05.02, licenses for administrators and supervisors. This is a permission to publish, and I welcome Kelly Meadows.
Good afternoon. So the amendments before you today come as a result of some discussions that started at the Professional Standards Teacher Education Board, or PSTAB. Specifically, there were members that brought constituent concerns that when we passed the licensure regulations in April 2024, requiring that all administrators and all specialists need to have a 3-credit special education course minimum to get initial licensure, was preventing LEAs and non-public schools, specifically our special education schools that are required to hold licensure. It was preventing them from hiring. There was a lot of discussion specifically around social workers. And there was actually some discussion around administrators as well, so principals and assistant principals, which was more surprising. They did ask MSDE to explore some language that would allow LEAs and non-public schools to hire an individual on a temporary professional license for the purpose of just getting that course. So if they meet all of the other requirements for licensure, but that is the only thing they're missing, that they can bring them in, make the hire, issue the temporary professional, which is a 2-year credential, non-renewable credential, and then they can move to the professional license as soon as they take that course. So we did that. And what you see in front of you today is the result. And so there are 3 different regulations that have been amended. The first regulation is where we've just modified the definition of that temporary professional credential to allow the issuance for that purpose. Currently, the temporary professional is only issued for teachers who are coming in from out of state and have met all the professional licensure requirements, but they still need to take licensure assessments, Maryland licensure assessments. As we all know, in July of this year, all of our out-of-state individuals will need to take a performance assessment, regardless of how many years of experience they have. So we carved out this credential for that purpose. So this is expanding that credential. So you're going to see the expansion of the credential under the 120104 issuances and types of licenses. And then if you scroll down into chapters 4 and 5, which are specific to specialists and administrators, you're going to see language that reads, an educator who meets the eligibility requirements. Hold on, sorry, I'm the wrong one. If an applicant has not completed 3 semester hours or obtained 3 state-approved CPD credits in special education coursework, but otherwise meets the requirements for initial licensure, a local school system, state-operated school, or non-public school may issue the temporary professional license to the applicant. And that is repeated in both chapters 4 and 5. That's the majority of the amendments that you see before you today. However, MSDE did take the opportunity to clarify some language that I want to point out to you that we were hearing over and over again was causing confusion across the state. So if you look at O4, the very first one on the, I'm sorry, these aren't numbered, the second page, 5. Where it reads, an educator who meets the eligibility requirements to advance to the professional license or advanced professional license shall retain all of the endorsements listed on the existing license. What was happening is because of language later down where we called out in the specialist chapter, 3 years of specialist performance. In the administrator chapter, we called 3 years of administrator performance. And what was happening was our licensure partners were thinking that if you advanced because you had 3 years of administrator experience, you couldn't bring with you your other endorsement areas outside of administration because you would need to have 3 years in each of them. That was not the intent of the regulation. So the remaining amendments that you see in front of you today is to clarify that, clean that up, and hopefully negate that confusion moving forward. And those are all the amendments. So at this point, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Dr. Lewis?
This one hurts my heart. And I'm really in a quandary over it because up until recently, I used to visit lots of schools across the country. And the vast majority here in Maryland as well of our students are educated in general education classrooms. And one of the major things that I heard from teachers in general ed settings was, I don't know anything about students with disabilities, not even what the general disabilities meant. Unclear how to read an IEP, certainly unclear how to participate in an IEP meeting, et cetera, which legally they have a responsibility to be there. I understand that we're in a staffing quandary and we have shortages across the state in all academic areas, particularly students, for teachers of students with disabilities. But to allow 2 years to pass without 3 credits in special ed, really, it's very hard for me. And I think I just don't know what to do with it. I got to think. This one I have to marinate on. It doesn't feel good to me. And I don't think it's good for the kids. So that's all I can say about that.
Dr. Lewis, out of curiosity, what time frame would you think would be more suitable?
Well, to be honest, I think they should have it when they come in, even with a temporary license. I don't think there's any reason why people couldn't have 3 credits or CPD credit. It's just, and again, I understand the challenge we face just staffing our classrooms. I completely understand it, and recruiting is an issue, and I don't want it to be a barrier to recruitment. But gosh, our kids deserve better than that. They just do.
Okay, Dr. Melanie McCarthy?
I just agree with what Dr. Lewis is saying. I don't have an answer. Everything she said, I ditto. But when teachers don't understand basic tenets of special education and how to look at children who have different learning abilities, mismatches occur. And for kids, frustration, it builds a lot of frustration, poor self-esteem, low achievement, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't have an answer, but I do agree with all that you said.
Is there a way to have some kind of compromise? I mean, back to Chair McCusker's question. I mean, if it's not 2 years, could we compromise at 1? I mean, something that at least allows, if that's all they're lacking, and that, Kelly, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing you say that if that was all they were lacking, they would be given this temporary.
That's correct. And to be clear, we're only talking about specialist areas and administrator areas, not teachers.
Oh,
Do we have numbers on this? Do we know how many of our staff don't have those credits?
No, this is all anecdotal reporting that it's a hiring issue and that they are not able to make the hire. They basically tell the social worker, go take the CPD, take the course, and then come back.
so these are specialists and administrators and not classroom teachers we're talking.
That's correct. That's correct.
Dr. Johnson?
One of the jobs of the administrator is to sit in the IEP meetings. And because they have to sit in those IEP meetings, they have to have some knowledge of special education. I don't think this is a great idea, because if you're not able to, as an administrator, if you're not able to understand the ins and outs of those IEP meetings and the purposes of the meetings and the handicapping conditions and the recommendations that are being made, it's very difficult for the child to actually get what they need, because the first responsibility that we have is to the children, especially with all children, but especially knowing exactly what happens for a child with an IEP.
Dr. Melanie McCarthy?
So, yes, of course, I affirm what you say, Dr. Johnson. My thought is, in those situations, would there be a caveat that there has to be someone as a mentor who's overseeing that person while they're accruing their credentials or accruing that information?
Overseeing them, you mean during the IEP meeting process?
Well, just, or just in the everyday practice of their service. Like, is there someone that can be, I don't know, I don't want to say coach, I don't want to say supervisor, but someone that is a mentor that they have to liaison with to make sure that whatever they're doing doesn't fly in the face of sound special ed practice. And if they struggle with a student, they have someone that can advise them in how to proceed.
When you say specialist, define specialist.
Sure. So specialists as defined in our regulations, so I'm just going to name them because it's easier.
Yeah.
So social worker, school psychologist, school counselor, library media specialist, gifted and talented specialist. I may be missing one.
Okay.
Is
that gives me a good idea of what that, yeah.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Okay. Do we have a sense of the magnitude of special ed as it relates to administrators in terms of an in count versus special ed with all that other list of specialists that are out there that you just listed?
No, but I have anecdotally heard far more reports about the specialists than the administrators. And in fact, I will share with you that the Professional Standards Board at first did not include the administrators in these amendments. And then during the course of discussion, they decided to add them.
So I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Dr. Wright.
So would an option be to not allow administrators to receive this exemption, but then that whole litany of all those other people, it could apply to for 1 year? Just as another suggestion for conversation.
Dr. Lewis?
I have a hard time believing, and this is why the numbers are so critically important, that a psychologist or a social worker would not have 3 credits about special education, because they're actually on IEPs in many places providing counseling services and assessing students with disabilities. So I
agree.
Not seeing the
100%.
numbers is just crazy to me.
It is. And it's just something we don't have. I mean, we just don't.
Yeah, no, I get it. But I don't think it's necessary. If those are the specialists that we're talking about, I can't imagine that there's 5 people out there that don't have it. I can't imagine that there's 1 person that doesn't have it.
So I will tell you, apologies. I will tell you that we did look in specifically to see if social worker programs in Maryland were providing a special education course. They're not. And in fact, College Park did reach out to us and we worked together, and I believe they are now. And they're a big provider because they are preparing social workers for all placements, not just schools. So I think that what was happening is they were basically, they were preparing the social worker, and then that social worker would have to get on their own, get that 3 credit course. And that's just the way that it's been for many, many years. I can't talk to school psychologists. We did not look into that because we kept hearing social worker, social worker, social worker.
Well, I think Dr. Lewis is spot on with psychologists and the folks folks are responsible for special education evaluation. I mean, I'd be stunned if they didn't have it.
It'd be shocking to me.
So am I correct in assuming that because they're all lumped together under the nomenclature of specialist, that because social workers specifically are a hiring issue and didn't have the coursework in there, that we've got to write it as if it's for everyone, even though really it's sort of aimed at that other one because of what the definition of a specialist is?
No, we can be strategic. I mean, there's a way to point to just the social worker regulation. So taking a look at the actual amendments, if we go to the specialist chapter 0402, we could, where that italicized text is, instead of pointing to, we could specifically point to the social worker regulation in that chapter and kind of carve it out specific to that one area, if that is the recommendation of the board to take back to the Professional Standards Board. But yeah, we could.
Dr. Johnson?
And with administrators too, it is not even a valid IEP meeting without an administrator there. So
by law.
That's true.
I don't know how an admin would go through their coursework and never have a class in special ed.
I wish I could tell you I never saw it, but I can't.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Okay.
I was gonna say the exact same thing.
All right. Well, committee, what's your pleasure? It sounds to me like the committee may feel like they're not ready to make a recommendation on this and would like to explore some different options.
And we're more than happy to do that, Chair McCusker, let Kelly and I take a look at it, again, and bring it back to you at another time. See if we can't get some more information behind it, now that we know what your concerns are and what the questions are, rather than trying to push the issue. I just as soon give it a hot minute and let us take a look at it and see if we can't come back to something that's a little bit more palatable for the committee.
Very
I
much
put-
appreciate that.
Okay, look, does anyone on the committee object to that? All right, seeing no objections, let's give it a hot minute, as you put it, Dr. Wright, and we'll bring it back.
Okay.
All right, and with that, thank you very much. With that, we're going to move on to request for consideration of alterations to COMAR 13A.05.02.13, Local Public Agency Administration. I'm going to kick this over to Mr. Hands. Correct?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. This, and the sun is shifting on me here, so pardon the glow on my face. This is an atypical item for the State Board. A member of the public can petition the State Board to adopt or amend regulations pursuant to State Government Article 10-123. And in that provision, we have 60 days to respond after someone submits one of these petitions to amend COMAR. We received the request, I believe it was February the 26th, so just a couple of weeks ago. This constituent requested that the State Board consider amending existing COMAR under 13A.05.02.13, Local Public Agency Administration, related to the licensure of audiologists and speech-language pathologists, with a request to include reimbursement of criminal background check fees by local education agencies. MSDE team and Dr. Hickman, and I know Ms. White helped as well on developing this, reviewed this request, and MSDE is recommending that the State Board deny the petition to change this regulation due to the additional financial burden that it would place on LEAs and the fact that there are a significant number of other licenses outside of speech language pathologists and audiologists that would not be covered by making this particular change to reimbursement for these fees. So the recommendation, I believe, from MSDE is to deny this petition. I'm happy to have Dr. Hickman to answer any questions, but we'll turn it back over to Ms. McCusker if there are any questions.
Thank you. Dr. Hickman, is there anything you'd like to present before we bring questions?
No, just after further review of this, and the way that Mr. Hands presented it does present an unforeseen burden on the school districts in terms of the existing reimbursement policies. The regulations already mandate reimbursement for the initial licensing fees and renewal fees for the audiologists and the speech language pathologists. And this would expand this to include criminal history record checks. Might be seen as an additional unnecessary financial burden. And then in terms of equity and fairness, if only audiologists or speech language pathologists receive this reimbursement, it might be perceived as unfair by other professionals who also incur similar costs for criminal history record checks, but do not receive reimbursement.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification. Questions from the committee? Dr. Mela McCarthy?
So, Dr. Hickman, from what you said, is it my understanding that when any staff or educator gets hired by a school district and they have to go for criminal history and the Maryland registry, that they are bearing the cost for that? Or,
the employee?
Yeah.
The employee, yes.
So in other words, a teacher says, okay, I'm going to get a job with Anne Arundel County. I have to go get my criminal history fingerprints. They pay for it on their own.
That's correct.
And the
say any and all.
registry as well?
Not all. I'm sorry, you said all. Pardon me.
So teachers, just as an example, so if teachers get hired and the requirement is you have to get fingerprints, which is law, do they pay for those fingerprints or does the district pay for it?
It is my understanding that they pay for it, the staff person.
The staff person. And how about the Maryland Registry?
For that, I'm not sure.
Dr. Lewis?
As the previous chief human capital officer in a large urban district in Maryland, we used to pay for fingerprinting and we could do it right at the office. We had a way to go right into the state system. We used to do it for all employees, whether they were audiologists, speech and language teachers, whatever, at no cost to them. So I don't know if things have changed because I haven't been in that office for a substantial period of time. But that the staff bore no cost in that, but
Yeah.
everybody was treated equally.
So that's my question. There must be a reason why this group of professionals are asking for reimbursement.
This group of professionals is asking for reimbursement because under COMAR, the initial licensing fee for them to be an audiologist or a speech language pathologist is a part of COMAR, but the background check is not. And that's the question that you asked about other, like the teachers, this is in referencing the audiologists, hearing aid dispensers, the speech language pathologists, and music therapists, those who supervise, who license, and who also provide like direct childcare.
I'm familiar with licensing. I'm a speech language pathologist, so I understand that. I understand that it's in COMAR, and I'm very happy that it's in COMAR because it's a level of credentialing that's needed. But my question is, if anyone else, and because it is COMAR, and you have to have that kind of documentation in order to work in a school, I question. I wonder why they're asking for this, because I have a feeling that maybe they see that other professionals who are or staff who are hired by school districts pay for it. So I'm just wondering the genesis of this request. That's all.
As part of when we were going through this and we were asking and looking at other districts, something like Member Lewis, there are districts who do pay for, but there are some who do require, and it depends upon the role.
But I would think if districts have people pay, they'd have everybody pay, not just speech and language pathologists and audiologists. Everybody would pay the fingerprinting fee. And in districts, and particularly in large urbans that have the capacity to do that in their central office, then no one would be charged. I mean, I think people would be treated differently. What I was wondering, Dr. Millie McCarthy, is this doesn't have anything to do with ASHA membership, does it? Because is that
State
part?
licensure is separate from ASHA certification.
Okay.
In order to practice in a state, in Maryland and in many states, you have to have a state license to practice, and there's a licensing board that oversees that. Often, if you have the clinical certificate of competence from ASHA, it's very easy to also obtain your license, but you still have to go through an application process. You have to show that you have the credentials by credit and by testing. But in order to practice it in the state of Maryland for private practice, you have to have a license. And I'm very pleased that it's part of COMAR because it is a credentialing and a standard setting practice.
I remember back to the early 2000s when I was at the State Department. I know that speech and language pathologists in particular were asking for reimbursement of ASHA licensure process at that point, and that was problematic as well.
Right, but I just question why they're asking for this, because
I
have a
I'm
feeling
going to go
that
with
they have
you.
seen other people having this and they being denied. So I just don't have all of the information. That's all.
I didn't necessarily present the data on the numbers, but I'll say again, not all of the LEAs pay for background screenings for their employees. So if we needed to look at who does not, and who pays and who doesn't, that is maybe why you're bringing that. I mean, you're right, correct in saying that.
And maybe
Ms. White, Ms. White has been, our legal counsel has been waiting to chime in. Can I please let her chime in? Thank you.
Sure. I just wanted to provide a little bit more information, and Mr. Hands might have additional as well. But my understanding is that this came to the state board because the particular individual who's requesting it works for a school system and had requested the reimbursement, assuming it would be part of their reimbursement of licensure fees. And the school system told them that is not that's not how they've interpreted our regulation, and that they do not reimburse, and that it would be required regulatory to see if you all would entertain a change to COMAR.
Dr. Johnson?
Are we speaking of licensure fee with the
Yeah.
organization and not with the school district? I know that, as Dr. Lewis has said, with the school district, if you have a criminal background check, you're hired, that's all paid for. So I'm trying to differentiate if it's for the licensure that they're getting in that specific area, or is it for working for the school, the LEA?
Dr. Goldson? You're muted.
Yep, I'm sorry. I don't have the answer to Dr. Irvin's question. What I was going to recommend is that we take the concern to legal, let them review it. Because what I don't want to do is open up Pandora's box where we make a recommendation that then we look up and now we're saying that there's a financial obligation to be fulfilled for lots of employees.
So you would, Ms. White?
Sorry, and I just wanted to answer the question specifically about, so where this is kind of coming from is that there is a part of the education article, so that's the 6112.1, that specifically says that for each audiologist and speech language pathologist, they shall receive an amount equal to the initial licensing fee or renewal of licensing fee. So that is specifically what the requirement is. And then the state board has adopted those additional regulations. I've not looked to see if there are any similar language for other professionals, but that's where this is coming from, is that statutory requirement.
Dr. Lewis?
So that sounds like it's not fingerprinting. It sounds like it's the licensure piece, which is what I was thinking originally.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yes, this person is asking that fingerprinting in the background check, that would be included with the reimbursement that they already received for their initial and renewal licensure.
Correct, Ms. Lewis. That is the renewal piece. This person is an employee. It's time to renew. They're paying for their licensure, but the background check is not paid for, and the background check is not paid for. The criminal background check is what they're asking for the district to pay for, and that's not being paid for on this sum.
Okay, I'm going to get quiet because you usually just do the check initially, and just because the license doesn't get renewed doesn't mean you do the background check again. So I'm gonna zip it for now because this is not making sense to me.
Correct.
Ms. Meadows? You're muted. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm hoping this may clear up some of the confusion. I was a part of this exchange as well. So where this is coming from is the individual who was renewing their license. Part of the licensing requirement from that board was a background check. You have to get a background check at the time of renewal. This is in addition to the background check. I see Dr. Melanie McCarthy nodding. So this is in addition to the background check that's due at hire and that an LEA has to complete so that they're associated, in CJIS with that employee. So this individual just assumed that because it's part of the licensure requirements that it would be reimbursable. And so when we looked at the law and shared that information, which made sense to the individual, the only way forward to make that change would be a change in regulation. And in fact, if that change is made, it would go above and beyond, unless Ms. White disagrees with me, the statutory requirement. So that is where this is coming from.
Thank you. Ms. White, do you agree? It goes above the requirement?
I think that will probably, since that would be legal advice, maybe we can talk about that offline if there's any
Understood.
questions, but.
Thank you. Understood. Understood. Okay, so I'm gonna, again, does the group feel ready to make a recommendation on this, or do you feel the need to have more information?
For me, more information with
Okay.
legal weighing in.
Okay. All right. Is there anyone that objects to getting more information before we make any kind of recommendation or take a vote? All right, then with the committee's permission, I am going to request that we get some more information and clarification specifically from legal before we move forward with this. Okay. And with that, I believe we're finished for the evening. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. For all of you that we are running over a little bit, so thank you for your extra time this evening, for your time in your presentations. We really appreciate staff's time and staying a little late to help our committee. We appreciate it very much. We appreciate those in the public who are tuning into our work. We appreciate your interest in our work. Our next meeting is in April, I believe, though it is on April the 16th. It will be a Wednesday instead of a Thursday. We do have a meeting change for next month. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.